This is Conversations with Cait, a podcast centered on the arts, culture, and race and gender politics. I'm Cait Malilay. Join me cross country throughout the month of April, where I will be traveling. Well, sort of. I'm highlighting independent bookstores across the United States where I will be interviewing owners and booksellers. Although we should be celebrating books all year, April is the month dedicated to literature. Not only is it National Poetry Month, but World Book Day this year in the US is on April 23, and National Library Week runs from the 23rd through the 29th. What I love about books is that I find that it brings communities together and offers lenses for readers. What I mean by this is that it opens one up to new perspectives. Most recently, however, books have become weaponized and used to divide us. So, I was curious. Why not reach out to booksellers across the U.S. to share their thoughts on the book ban situation in states with all kinds of political leanings? Be sure to follow my Instagram at Cait_Malilay_writes for updates on articles. You can also follow my Bookstagram at Cait_Malilay_reads for more book-related content. For today's guest speaker, I'm happy to introduce Donus D. Roberts, a retired high school English teacher and owner of DDR Books, an independent bookstore in South Dakota. He's joining us via phone all the way from the Midwest. Good morning, Donus. How are you?
Well, I'm okay. My daughter's sitting here taking care of the store for me, and she says should be ringing, and you rang immediately. I'm getting my coffee. I forgot my coffee. I'm going back to a quiet area.
Thank you for joining us today. You are the owner and founder of DDR Books, an independent bookstore in Watertown, South Dakota. First off, can you tell us what is life like in South Dakota?
Well, this is a winter that will never end. We are now under another blizzard warning, and it's not that it's totally unusual that you would have a snowstorm in April, but that we just seem to have one a week. And so it's pretty cool here. It's supposed to be a high today of about 30, and that's really cool. And it's supposed to start snowing tonight.
What's the story behind DDR Books?
Well, the bookstore has its name, which is just simply my initials. And that was a while coming because at first I didn't know what to name the bookstore, and I projected out a couple of names that people thought were about as boring as, eating dirt. So it was obvious when in my professional career, I was a teacher. In my professional career, teaching and coaching, everyone called me DDR, which are my initials. And the fact that I couldn't immediately perceive that would be a good title for a bookstore is my own fault. But then when I thought about it, I said, well, let's try this DDR thing for a bookstore. And it's people always are very interested in how those initials came about. And they're simply my initials. My first name is Donus, and my middle name is Dan, and the last name is Roberts, so that's DDR.
And prior to our interview, you mentioned the name Donus. Can you expand more on like the meaning behind it? You mentioned it comes from Greek.
Right. It does come from Greek, and it's curious because I'm no part Greek. My mother was a teacher, and she was very interested in mythology when she was a teacher. So when they got married, my dad and mom got married in their 30s, and they wanted to have children, but it didn't appear to be likely, I guess, the doctor said. And then she got pregnant, and that was amazing, and the doctor was worried about whether she could carry it to term. the baby, and then she came up with the name of Donus. She saw the name, I guess, of some kid who drowned in Ohio named Donus, and realized that it was the Roman form of the name Adonis. When Rome took over all the empire of Greece, they created their own mythological gods, and they were all the Greek gods translated to Roman words. So Donus was then the Greek god Adonis, and so she chose the Western form of the name, but she chose it also because this is kind of the interesting part, because the meaning of the word Adonis in Greece is gift. And so since she was not supposedly able to have a child, had one, she chose that name.
On the website, it says that you've read and accumulated books all your life. If you can estimate how many books you've accumulated over time, what would be the number?
Well, I have a bookstore, so I have in the bookstore, either displayed or in storage, about 50,000 books. And then
Wow.
in our house, we have 14,000. And that's primarily my collection, which I keep separate from the bookstore.
What is the first book that got you into reading?
Well, the book that was most memorable for me as a little kid was Bambi. I was fascinated by Bambi, and I required my mother to read it and read it and read it, so that basically I had it memorized.
DDR Books hosts events promoting local authors. What are some titles that you recommend that capture Watertown or South Dakota's culture and history in general?
Well, there's a lot, every region of the country has its own special motif. One of the things out here that's very popular to be written by regional authors, local, are true crime books of unsolved crimes, or crimes that were solved incorrectly, or crimes that just are missing a solution. And there's a lot of writers writing on famous crime cases. We have a population in South Dakota, a high population of Native Americans. And unfortunately, the disappearance and/or murder rate among them is extremely high. And most of the cases, for various reasons, have not been solved. Most of the cases, probably in a different ethnic group, would be solved. So that's always a big interest area in our state. Everyone, of course, thinks they have a story to tell, and that's all good. Generally, that we have a story to tell. We have next week, 8 days from now, we are having a major event, a debut of a book written by some history professors, a new history of the state.
And I have to ask, from one reader to another, what book or books are you currently reading, or books that are on your to be read list?
Well, I'm currently reading kind of a mystery Western by a very popular national author, C.J. Box, who writes a story of, writes his novel set in Wyoming, primarily, sometimes Western South Dakota, Montana, or Colorado. And so that's what I'm reading. It's a really interesting little stories. The guy is a good, C.J. Box, the author, good storyteller. So that's what I'm reading now, is in between. I'm heading for some major kind of history next. Like I try to balance my reading between history or biography and fiction.
How do you stay committed to a book?
Well, how do I stay committed? I'm very fond of good writing, uh, and I believe that actually that fiction can tell us much more about ourselves than history. So I'm committed to a good book because I'm committed to storytelling or any kind of storytelling, including historical. And sometimes now you do change. I do turn down reading some, at least temporarily, some really long books because I'm I don't want to get mired down into a book for weeks. And so sometimes I turn down reading a book that's really long by somebody, even though it may be very rewarding.
You and your wife are retired high school English teachers, and your daughter is also an English high school teacher. There's been a lot
Right.
going on with the book ban situation happening across the US in schools and public libraries. And a lot of these titles are that are targeted center on the LGBTQ plus community and race. What do you make of this?
Well, I find it extremely disappointing that there is so much pressure on censorship. It's a lot of noise being made by a very narrow audience, but a lot of people are sucked into it by their own kind of passions and fail to realize that that they may be in a minority on another issue. So I'm very disappointed that this is taking place and that there's such a fear of books, that books have become so weaponized in this whole thing. And that I'm also disappointed that so many people are sitting on the sidelines on the issue. They say that they're not in favor of what they see, but they express nothing against it. So I'm very frustrated. Um, I'm fearful for the future of the country too.
Yeah, books have been, I honestly thought books and literature are what brings communities together, but it's become so politicized.
Right, yes. They there's virtually nothing that can't be politicized. Right. But there's some, yeah, I mean, if you wanted to distort something, I listened to some of these interviews by some people on national leadership, all this right and left stuff, and they have come up with interpretations of evil, and absolutely they could come up with an interpretation of evil in Bambi, and I just don't understand it. They're out there looking for something, and
Bambi.
well, yeah, I mean, they find evil in so much. There's also such an interesting struggle over individualism now. We've changed the definition of that in the course of time. It has nothing to do with the way Emerson used to define individualism. It has everything to do with, creating some sort of ID fix in your mind, and you then match all the reality to your ID fix. It's very, very frustrating for me in the academic world, and it's very frustrating to see be a teacher nowadays too. I mean, teachers nowadays, especially high school teachers, in the public education, are just under a microscope.
When you were teaching, was there like as big of a concern of book bans, or do you remember like any books that were banned while you were a high
Oh,
school English teacher?
there's always been some concern about that, but this whole thing is multiplying on us very fast. Because it back when there were always people saying that, I didn't like that book you had my daughter read or something, and I said, well, she picked it herself, but you shouldn't have let her pick it. There's always been that. Now it's altogether different. It's just, I mean, I am, if I was a pretty liberal, a pretty aggressive teacher. I'm fairly well known in the teaching world, and I probably would have been fired now.
Most recently, publishers have been editing books, removing offensive language, and in an attempt to make it more inclusive and be more sensitive. We've seen it in Roald Dahl's books and most recently Agatha Christie's novels. For example, according to The Telegraph, the word native in Christie's Miss Marple's Final Cases and two other stories was replaced with local. In Dahl's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Augustus is no longer described as fat. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I don't know too much about the Christie controversy. I've kind of just heard about it. You know, you just can't remake things in the context of change. And so I'm just always frustrated when you take a work that is from the past and try to remodel it for a present that is only, I think, temporary. And so other than that, I don't consider it the worst of the offenses that are taking place, but I understand the concern.
Yeah, like it captures the historical time period. Like you could recognize like the rhetorical approach in books.
Right.
Does it seem like an erasure kind of like of history or like that time period in your opinion?
Yes, I'd say so. Yeah.
Lastly, for those interested in supporting DDR Books, can you share with our listeners what are your websites or social media pages?
We use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, DDR Books.
Donus D. Roberts of DDR Books in Watertown, South Dakota, I thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to Conversations with Cait, a podcast centered on the arts, culture, and race and gender politics. Be sure to support your local independent bookstores and libraries. You can also follow my Instagram at Cait_Malilay_writes for updates on future articles and episodes. You can also follow my Bookstagram at Cait_Malilay_reads for more bookish content. To end this episode, let's conclude with a witty quote by Oscar Wilde. The public is wonderfully tolerant. It forgives everything except genius.